The wind cut through Amelia Everett's threadbare dress like 1,000 frozen knives as she stood on the wooden platform in Tesco's town square, her wrists bound with rough hemp rope that had already rubbed her skin raw. The auctioneer's voice droned on about her skills in cooking and sewing, as if she were nothing more than livestock to be inspected and purchased, and she kept her eyes fixed on the snow-covered ground rather than face the leering crowd of men gathered before her on this bitter January morning in 1882. She had been traveling west with her father when fever took him 3 weeks ago, leaving her alone and penniless in a town that saw women without protection as commodities to be traded. The local marshal had given her 2 choices after her father's death: work off her debts through indentured servitude, or face vagrancy charges that would land her in a territorial prison. Neither option had seemed like a real choice at all. The cold seeped through her worn boots as she shifted her weight, trying to maintain what little dignity remained. Her dark blonde hair whipped around her face, and she could feel the stares of the men below burning into her skin. Some of them she recognized from the saloon where she had worked washing dishes for the past 2 weeks, trying desperately to earn enough to pay for her father's burial and her own passage somewhere, anywhere else. "Do I hear $20? The auctioneer called out, his breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. "This here is a quality woman, gentlemen. Young, strong, educated even. Her contract is for 3 years of service." $20. That was what her freedom was worth, what 3 years of her life had been reduced to in this godforsaken place. Amelia felt her throat tighten with unshed tears, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give these men the satisfaction of seeing her break. A man near the front shouted out a bid, his voice thick with whiskey despite the early hour. Amelia recognized him as one of the ranch hands who had tried to corner her in the back room of the saloon last week. Her stomach turned at the thought of belonging to him, of being at his mercy for 3 long years. $20 to Mr. Crawford, the auctioneer announced. "Do I hear 25? The crowd murmured, some men shaking their heads and walking away. $20 was already more than most were willing to pay for a servant, especially with winter setting in and work scarce. Amelia felt panic rising in her chest as Crawford grinned up at her, revealing teeth stained brown from tobacco. "Going once," the auctioneer said, raising his gavel. $50. The voice came from the back of the crowd, deep and steady, cutting through the wind like a bell. Every head turned to see who had spoken, and Amelia found herself looking at a tall figure moving through the gathered men. He wore a heavy wool coat dusted with snow, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the weather, and he walked with the confident gait of someone who had spent more time in a saddle than on his feet. $50? The auctioneer repeated, his voice rising with excitement. "Well now, that is a serious bid, sir. $50 to the gentleman in back. Do I hear 55? Crawford scowled and spat into the snow, but he shook his head and pushed his way out of the crowd, clearly unwilling to compete with that kind of money. The other men followed suit, dispersing now that the entertainment had become too expensive for their tastes. Going once, going twice, sold to Mr. Ezra Zimmerman for $50. The stranger reached the platform and pulled out a leather pouch, counting out gold coins into the auctioneer's eager hands. Amelia studied him as he conducted his business, trying to gauge what kind of man had just purchased her contract. He appeared to be in his mid-20s, perhaps 26 or 27, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days of dark stubble. When he finally looked up at her, she was struck by the unusual color of his eyes, a warm amber that seemed at odds with the coldness of everything around them. "Come on down from there," he said quietly, his voice gentler than she had expected. "Let us get you out of this wind." The auctioneer cut the ropes binding her wrists, and Amelia stumbled down the platform steps, her legs stiff from standing in the cold. Ezra reached out to steady her, his hand firm but not rough on her elbow. She flinched instinctively, and he immediately released her, taking a step back to give her space. "I am not going to hurt you," he said, meeting her eyes directly. "You have my word on that." Amelia wanted to believe him, wanted to trust the sincerity she heard in his voice, but experience had taught her that words were cheap and a man's promises even cheaper. She nodded wordlessly, wrapping her arms around herself against the bitter cold. Ezra looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression as he took in her thin dress and inadequate clothing. Then, to her complete surprise, he turned and walked toward a magnificent chestnut mare tied to the hitching post nearby. The horse was clearly well cared for, with a glossy coat and quality tack that spoke of significant value. "Can you ride?" he asked, untying the reins. "Yes," Amelia managed, confused by the question. "My father taught me when I was young." "Good." Ezra led the mare over to her and pressed the reins into her cold hands. "She is yours." Amelia stared at him, certain she had misheard. "I do not understand." "The horse. She is yours now. Her name is Copper, and she has carried me through some rough country, but I think she will serve you better." He gestured toward the saddle. "There is a bedroll tied on the back, some supplies in the saddlebags. Should be enough to get you wherever you need to go." "But you just paid $50 for my contract," Amelia said, her mind reeling. "Why would you give me your horse? How will you travel?" Ezra shrugged, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I will walk, or buy another horse. That is my concern, not yours." He looked past her at the town square, his expression hardening. "What they were doing here today, selling people like property, it is not right. I do not care what the law says about debt contracts or indentured service. Nobody should be bought and sold like cattle." Amelia felt tears finally spill over, running hot down her frozen cheeks. "I do not have anywhere to go." "Then go anywhere," Ezra said simply. "Go somewhere warm. Go somewhere you can start fresh, where nobody knows your story or your debts. Just go somewhere better than here." She looked down at the reins in her hands, feeling the weight of the gift he was offering her. Freedom, a chance, a horse worth more than most people in this town would see in a year, and he was giving it to her without asking for anything in return, without even knowing her name. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you doing this?" Ezra was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight of old pain. "Because 2 years ago, I watched my sister get sold in a town square in New Mexico territory. I was 15, too young and too poor to do anything about it. I have spent every day since then wishing I could go back and change what happened, wishing I had been able to help her." He met Amelia's eyes again. "I cannot undo the past, but I can do something about today, about you. Your sister," Amelia said softly. "What happened to her?" "I do not know. She was taken north, toward Colorado. I looked for her for a year, followed every lead, asked in every town. It was like she vanished." He cleared his throat, pushing away the emotion that had crept into his voice. "So, when I rode into town this morning and saw them setting up that platform, saw you standing there, I knew I could not just ride on by." Amelia wiped at her tears with the back of her hand, trying to compose herself. "I am Amelia Everett. Ezra Zimmerman." He tipped his hat to her. "Though I suppose you heard that already." "Thank you, Ezra." The words felt inadequate for what he had done, but they were all she had. "I will never forget this kindness. You do not owe me anything, including gratitude." He stepped back, ready to let her go. "Just promise me you will use this chance to build a good life for yourself." Amelia looked at the horse, then at the town around them, then back at Ezra. An idea was forming in her mind, probably a foolish one, but she found herself speaking before she could think better of it. "Where are you headed?" "I have a small ranch about 10 miles west of here. Not much, just a cabin and some grazing land, but it is mine." He studied her face. "Why do you ask?" "You gave me your horse," she said slowly. "That means you will be walking 10 miles in a blizzard. That seems like a poor plan." "I have walked through worse." "Or," Amelia continued, gathering her courage, "I could ride with you to your ranch, make sure you get home safely. Maybe stay a few days until this weather clears and I can figure out where to go next." She saw him start to protest and hurried on. "I am a good cook, and you said yourself they advertised my skills. Let me at least repay your kindness with some decent meals and help around your ranch. Just for a little while." Ezra frowned, clearly conflicted. "Amelia, I did not give you that horse so you would feel obligated to me. The whole point was to give you freedom, not to trade one obligation for another." "It would not be an obligation," she insisted. "It would be my choice. And honestly, the idea of riding off alone into this weather with no destination and no plan terrifies me. I could use a few days to rest and think, if you are willing to offer that." He was quiet for a long moment, snow settling on his shoulders and hat. Finally, he nodded slowly. "A few days, then, until the weather clears and you have had time to make a proper plan. But you are a guest, not a servant. I want to be clear about that. Clear as glass, Amelia agreed, feeling some of the tension leave her shoulders. She had been prepared to strike out alone if necessary, but the prospect of a warm place to stay and a kind face while she figured out her next move was more appealing than she wanted to admit. Ezra showed her how to mount Copper, who stood patiently as Amelia pulled herself into the saddle. Her body remembered the motions even after years away from horses, and she settled into the seat with only a little awkwardness. Ezra took the reins and began leading the mare down the main street of Tascosa, heading west. The town was small, just a collection of rough buildings clustered around the main road. Amelia had spent the past 3 weeks here, but she had never seen much of it beyond the saloon and the boarding house where she had rented a tiny room until her money ran out. As they passed the general store, she saw women peering out through the frosted windows, their faces curious and judgmental. "They will talk," she said quietly. "Let them," Ezra replied without looking back. "People in towns like this always need something to gossip about. Better it should be us than someone else." They left Tascosa behind, following a road that quickly became little more than a trail through the snow-covered prairie. The wind howled across the open land, and Amelia hunched down in the saddle, trying to make herself small against the cold. She noticed that Ezra had wrapped a scarf around his face, leaving only his eyes visible, and he walked with his head down against the wind. "How far did you say your ranch was?" she called out, having to raise her voice to be heard over the storm. "About 10 miles, he called back. "We should make it before dark if this wind does not get worse." Amelia felt guilty watching him trudge through the deepening snow while she rode his horse. "I could walk for a while. We could take turns." "You are half frozen already in that dress," Ezra said. "I have proper clothes and boots. You just hold on and try to stay warm." She wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. Her thin dress and worn coat were no match for this weather, and she could already feel the cold seeping into her bones. Instead, she focused on staying in the saddle and trying not to think about how much her feet hurt. The landscape was bleak and beautiful, vast stretches of white broken only by occasional clusters of bare trees or rocky outcroppings. In summer, she imagined this country would be brown and dry, but winter had transformed it into something otherworldly. The snow muffled all sound except for the wind, creating a sense of isolation that was both frightening and peaceful. "Have you been ranching long?" she asked after a while, wanting to break the silence. "About a year," Ezra answered. "I worked as a ranch hand for several years, saved every penny I could. When the previous owner decided to move back east, he sold me the property for a fair price. It is not much, but it is honest work." "Do you raise cattle?" "Some. Mostly I have been focused on horses, breeding and training them." He glanced back at Copper. "This girl is from my first successful breeding pair. Her mother was a Mustang I caught and gentled. Father was a thoroughbred stallion from a ranch in Kansas." Amelia stroked Copper's neck, feeling the strong muscles beneath the glossy coat. "She is beautiful. You must have other horses if you are breeding them." "3 mares and a stallion, plus 2 yearlings, and a mule named Herbert who thinks he owns the place." There was affection in his voice when he spoke about the animals. "They are good company, better than most people I have met." "I know what you mean," Amelia said softly, thinking of all the leering men in the saloon, the marshal who had looked at her like a problem to be solved, the auctioneer who had described her skills as if she were merchandise. Animals do not judge you for your circumstances. They fell into a comfortable silence after that, saving their energy for the journey. The storm seemed to be worsening, the wind picking up until it felt like a living thing trying to tear them off the path. Amelia could barely see more than a few feet ahead through the driving snow, and she marveled that Ezra seemed to know exactly where he was going, despite the whiteout conditions. "Almost there," he called out after what felt like hours. "Just over this next rise." Amelia squinted through the snow and could just make out the dark shape of buildings ahead. As they drew closer, she saw a sturdy log cabin with smoke rising from a stone chimney, a large barn, and several smaller outbuildings. It was simple but well-maintained, and the sight of that smoke promised warmth and shelter from the brutal wind. Ezra led them to the barn first, sliding open the large door and ushering Copper inside. Amelia nearly fell out of the saddle, her legs stiff and unresponsive from the cold and the long ride. Ezra caught her before she could hit the ground, supporting her weight until she found her footing. "Easy now," he said. "Let us get you inside by the fire. I will take care of Copper." "I can help," Amelia protested. though her teeth were chattering so hard she could barely get the words out. "You can help tomorrow. Right now you need to get warm before you lose any toes to frostbite." He guided her toward the barn door. "The cabin is right there. Door is unlocked. Get yourself next to the fire and wrap up in the blankets on the bed. I will be in shortly." Amelia wanted to argue, but the cold had sapped all her strength. She stumbled through the snow to the cabin door, pushed it open, and nearly cried with relief at the wave of heat that greeted her. The interior was a single large room with a stone fireplace, a simple bed in one corner, a table with 2 chairs, and shelves lined with supplies and books. A fire crackled merrily in the hearth, and she realized Ezra must have banked it before leaving that morning, keeping the coals alive so the cabin would stay warm. She made her way to the fireplace and sank down onto the floor in front of it, holding her hands out to the flames. Feeling slowly returned to her fingers and toes, bringing with it a painful tingling sensation that made her gasp. She had been colder than she realized, dangerously close to the edge that separated discomfort from real harm. The cabin door opened and Ezra entered, brushing snow from his coat and stamping his boots. He carried the saddlebags from Copper's back and set them down near the door, then shed his outer layers and hung them on pegs by the entrance. "How are your feet?" he asked, crouching down beside her. "Cold, but I can feel them," she said. "I think they will be all right. Let me see." When she hesitated, he added gently, "I am not trying to be forward. I just need to make sure you do not have frostbite." Amelia nodded and reluctantly pulled off her worn boots, revealing stockings with holes in the toes. Ezra examined her feet with a clinical efficiency, pressing gently on her toes and checking for the telltale white patches that would indicate serious cold damage. "You were lucky," he said finally. "Cold and sore, but nothing permanent. Keep them near the fire for a while longer." He stood and moved to one of the shelves, rummaging through a trunk until he pulled out a thick pair of wool socks. "Here, these will be too big, but they are warm and dry." Amelia accepted them gratefully, pulling the socks on over her own. They came up almost to her knees, and she had to admit they felt wonderful. "Thank you for everything. I know I keep saying that, but I do not know what else to say." "You do not need to say anything." Ezra moved to the stove in the corner and began preparing coffee, his movements easy and practiced. "Are you hungry? I have beans and salt pork, some cornbread I made yesterday. Nothing fancy, but it will fill your stomach." "That sounds like a feast," Amelia said honestly. She could not remember the last time she had eaten a proper meal. While Ezra prepared the food, Amelia looked around the cabin more carefully. Despite its simple furnishings, it was clear that someone had put thought into making it a home. The shelves held not just supplies, but books, a luxury that spoke of education and curiosity. A rifle hung over the door, kept clean and oiled. The floor was swept, the dishes stacked neatly, everything in its proper place. "Do you live here alone?" she asked. "Just me and the animals," Ezra confirmed. He set a pot of beans on the stove to warm. "It gets lonely sometimes, but I prefer it to working for someone else. At least here, my time is my own." "I can understand that." Amelia watched the flames dance in the fireplace. "My father and I were heading west to start fresh. He had sold everything we owned back in Missouri, said he wanted to find a place where we could build something of our own. He was a carpenter, very skilled. He thought he could find work in one of the boom towns, maybe set up his own shop eventually." "What happened?" Ezra asked quietly. "We got caught in a storm about a month ago. We took shelter in an abandoned soddy, and the place was full of drafts and leaks. My father got soaked through, and by morning he was burning up with fever. We made it to Tascosa, and the doctor did what he could, but the fever just would not break. He died 2 weeks after we arrived." Her voice cracked, and she took a moment to compose herself. "I tried to find work, tried to earn money for his burial and for passage somewhere else, but nobody wanted to hire a single woman. The marshal said I was penniless and therefore a vagrant. He said I could work off my debts through an indenture contract or go to prison. I chose the contract, though I'm not sure it was really a choice at all." Ezra was quiet for a moment, stirring the beans with more force than necessary. "I am sorry about your father, and I am sorry about what this town put you through. You deserved better." "A lot of people deserve better than what they get," Amelia said. "Like your sister. Have you truly given up on finding her?" "Not given up exactly, but the trail went cold more than a year ago, and I had to make a choice. Keep searching and stay poor and desperate, or build something stable so that if she ever needs help, I will be in a position to give it." He sighed. "I still ask about her whenever I go into town, send letters to marshals in Colorado and Wyoming. Maybe someday I will get word." They ate dinner in companionable silence, the warmth of the food and the fire finally chasing away the last of the cold. Amelia had not realized how hungry she was until she started eating, and she had to force herself to slow down and not make herself sick. Ezra noticed but said nothing, simply refilling her plate when she finished the first helping. After dinner, they sat by the fire drinking coffee, and Amelia found herself studying Ezra's face in the firelight. He had strong features, the kind that would age well, and there was a kindness in his eyes that she had not expected to find in a cowboy living alone on the Texas plains. He was only a few years older than her own, 21 years, but he carried himself with a maturity born of hard experience. "You can have the bed," Ezra said, breaking into her thoughts. "I will make up a bedroll by the fire." "That does not seem fair," Amelia protested. "This is your home, and you are my guest. Besides, I have spent plenty of nights sleeping on the ground. One more will not hurt me." He stood and began pulling blankets from a chest. "There is a wash basin in the corner if you want to clean up, and I have an extra shirt you can sleep in if you want to get out of that dress." Amelia looked down at her threadbare dress, remembering how she had stood in the town square wearing it, how the men had stared at her. The idea of taking it off and putting on something clean and warm was almost overwhelmingly appealing. Ezra seemed to sense her thoughts. "I will step outside for a bit, check on the animals one more time. You take your time." After he left, Amelia washed quickly in the basin, scrubbing away the dirt and the memories of the day. She found the shirt he had mentioned, a soft flannel that hung almost to her knees, and changed into it gratefully. Her dress she folded carefully and set aside, and she was just climbing into the bed when Ezra knocked on the door. "Are you decent?" he called. "Yes, come in." He entered, bringing with him a blast of cold air and snow. "Storm is getting worse. We will likely be snowed in for a few days." "I am sorry," Amelia said. "You are stuck with me longer than you planned." "I am not stuck with anything." Ezra began arranging his bedroll by the fire. "And honestly, it will be nice to have someone to talk to besides Herbert the mule. He's not much for conversation." Amelia smiled, feeling some of the tension leave her shoulders. "Thank you for making this easy. I know it must be strange, having a complete stranger in your home. Strange things have happened." He settled into his bedroll, staring up at the ceiling. "Get some rest, Amelia. Tomorrow we can figure out what comes next." She lay back on the bed, which was surprisingly comfortable, and pulled the heavy quilts up to her chin. The cabin was warm, the bed was soft, and for the first time in weeks, she felt safe. She listened to the wind howling outside and the crackle of the fire, and she thought about the strange twist of fate that had brought her here. Ezra Zimmerman had paid $50 for her contract and then immediately given her his horse and her freedom. He had walked through a blizzard to get her somewhere warm. He had fed her and clothed her and asked for nothing in return. Men like that were supposed to be fiction, the stuff of dime novels and fairy tales. They were not supposed to exist in the real world, certainly not in a place as hard and cruel as the West Texas frontier. And yet, here he was, sleeping on the floor of his own cabin so she could have the bed, treating her with a respect and kindness she had begun to think did not exist. She found herself wondering about him, about what had shaped him into the man he was. The loss of his sister had clearly marked him deeply, had given him an empathy for the suffering of others that most men lacked. "Ezra," she said softly into the darkness. "Yes? Your sister. What was her name?" Sarah Zimmerman." His voice was thick with emotion. "She was 17 when they took her. She loved horses, same as me. Used to say she wanted to own a ranch someday, breed the finest horses in the territory. She sounds wonderful. She was. She is." He corrected himself fiercely. "I have to believe she is still out there somewhere, that she found a way to survive." Amelia felt tears prick her eyes. "I will hope that too, for both of you." "Thank you," Ezra said quietly. "Now get some sleep. Morning comes early on a ranch, even in a blizzard." Amelia closed her eyes and listened to his breathing slow and deepen as he fell asleep. She thought about Sarah Zimmerman, sold at 17, disappeared into the vast territory to the north. She thought about her own father, buried in a pauper's grave in Tascosa. She thought about all the ways the world could be cruel and all the small ways people could fight against that cruelty. And she thought about the man sleeping by the fire, who had given a stranger his horse and asked for nothing in return. She wondered what it would be like to stay here longer than a few days, to learn the rhythms of this place, to know Ezra as more than just the man who had saved her. The thought should have frightened her, should have felt like trading one form of bondage for another, but instead it felt like possibility. She fell asleep with snow falling outside and warmth all around her, and for the first time in a long time, she did not dream of fear. Morning came with pale gray light filtering through the cabin's single window. Amelia woke slowly, disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings, until the events of the previous day came rushing back. She sat up and saw that Ezra's bedroll was already neatly rolled and stowed, and the smell of coffee filled the air. Ezra stood at the stove, his back to her, and she took a moment to study him in the morning light. He had changed into clean clothes, a dark blue shirt, and worn denim pants, and his dark hair was still damp from washing. There was something appealing about the capable way he moved around the kitchen area, the efficiency of someone who was used to taking care of himself. "Good morning," she said, her voice still rough with sleep. He turned and smiled, and she was struck again by how that smile transformed his face. "Morning. I hope I did not wake you. I tried to be quiet, but these old floorboards creak something fierce." "I did not hear a thing." Amelia climbed out of bed, suddenly self-conscious about being dressed in nothing but his shirt. "I should get dressed." "Your dress is hanging by the fire," Ezra said, turning back to the stove to give her privacy. "I brushed the dirt off it and mended a tear in the hem. It is not much, but it should help." Amelia felt something warm bloom in her chest. He had mended her dress while she slept, this man who had already given her so much. She dressed quickly, finding that he had done a neat job with the repair, his stitches small and even. Her father had taught her to sew when she was young, saying a man should know how to mend his own clothes, and apparently Ezra had learned the same lesson. "Thank you," she said, coming to stand by the stove. "You did not have to do that." "I was awake anyway. Storm kept me up for a while." He poured her a cup of coffee and handed it to her. "I made oatmeal. It is not exciting, but it is hot and filling." They ate breakfast together at the small table, and Amelia found herself relaxing into the easy domesticity of it. Ezra told her about the ranch, about his plans to expand the horse breeding operation, about the challenges of working alone in such isolated country. She told him about her childhood in Missouri, about learning carpentry from her father, about the dreams they had shared of building something together in the West. "You know carpentry?" Ezra asked, his interest clearly piqued. "That is a valuable skill out here." "My father thought so. He taught me everything he knew, said a woman should be able to support herself if needed." She traced the rim of her coffee cup with one finger. "The irony is not lost on me that I ended up on that auction block anyway." "You were alone in a strange town with no money. That is not a failure of skill or character. That is just bad circumstances." Ezra leaned back in his chair. "And if you do have carpentry skills, well, I have been meaning to build a proper chicken coop and maybe expand the barn. I am fair with basic repairs, but I am no craftsman." Amelia looked at him carefully, trying to gauge if this was charity disguised as opportunity. "Are you offering me work?" "I am saying that if you wanted to stay for a while, past just a few days, there would be useful things you could do, and I would pay you fairly for your labor, same as I would pay any hired hand." He met her eyes steadily. "But only if that is what you want. The offer of the horse still stands. Once the storm clears, you are free to go wherever you choose." She thought about it, weighing her options. She could take Copper and ride south, maybe make it to San Antonio or Austin, try to find work in a larger city. Or she could stay here, at least for a while, earning money and building up her resources before she decided on her next move. The latter option seemed more practical, and if she was being honest with herself, it was also more appealing. The idea of striking out alone into unknown territory was daunting, while staying here with Ezra felt safe. "I would like to stay," she said finally. "At least through the winter, if the offer stands that long. I can help with the carpentry projects, and I am good with animals too. I grew up around horses." "The offer stands as long as you want it to," Ezra said, "and I meant what I said about paying you fairly. I will not take advantage of your circumstances." They shook hands across the table, a formal gesture that felt right for the arrangement they were making. Amelia felt the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip, and she thought that she had made the right choice. There were worse places to spend a winter than in a warm cabin with a kind man and honest work to do. The storm raged for 3 more days, trapping them inside the cabin with occasional forays to the barn to care for the animals. Amelia learned the routines of the ranch during those days, feeding and watering the horses and the recalcitrant mule Herbert, collecting eggs from the few chickens Ezra kept, helping with the endless small tasks that kept the homestead running. She also learned about Ezra. He was quieter than most men she had known, more comfortable with silence than with idle chatter. But when he did speak, it was with thoughtfulness and sincerity. He loved his horses with a passion that bordered on devotion, and he could talk for hours about bloodlines and confirmation and training techniques. He read voraciously, his small collection of books spanning everything from agricultural guides to poetry to adventure novels. "Where did you learn to read so well?" Amelia asked one evening as they sat by the fire, each absorbed in their own book. "My mother taught me," Ezra said. "She was a school teacher back in Ohio before she married my father and moved west. She believed education was the key to a better life, so she made sure Sarah and I could read and write and figure." His expression darkened. Not that it did Sarah much good in the end. "Education is never wasted," Amelia said gently. "Whatever happened to your sister, wherever she is, I am sure those skills have helped her survive." "Maybe?" He did not sound convinced. "I just wish I knew if she was all right. Not knowing is the worst part. I can imagine 1,000 different fates for her, and most of them are not good." Amelia wanted to comfort him, but did not know how. Instead, she shared her own story of loss, telling him about the long weeks watching her father decline, about the helpless feeling of watching someone you love slip away while being unable to do anything to stop it. "At least you were there with him at the end," Ezra said. "At least he did not die alone." "That is true." Amelia had not thought of it that way. "And he knew I would be all right. I told him I was strong enough to make it on my own, even though I was not sure I believed it myself." "You are stronger than you think," Ezra said, looking at her intently. "You survived losing your father, being alone in a hostile town, being sold like property, and you are still here, still fighting. That takes real strength." His words warmed her more than the fire ever could, and she found herself blushing under his gaze. There was something in the way he looked at her, something that went beyond simple kindness or pity. She recognized it because she felt the same pull toward him, an attraction that had been growing steadily over the past few days. She told herself it was too soon, that she barely knew him, that getting involved with her employer was a recipe for disaster. But her heart did not listen to logic, and she found herself noticing everything about him, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentleness of his hands when he worked with the horses, the sound of his voice reading aloud in the evenings. On the 4th day, the storm finally broke. They woke to brilliant sunshine, reflecting off deep snowdrifts. The world transformed into a glittering expanse of white. Ezra went out first, breaking a path to the barn, and Amelia followed in his footsteps, marveling at the beauty of it all. "It will melt fast," Ezra said, looking at the clear sky. "In a few days, the road should be passable again." Amelia knew what he was really asking. Now that the storm had passed, did she still want to stay, or would she take Copper and ride on? She found her answer easily. "Show me where you want that chicken coop," she said, "and I will need to take measurements of the barn to plan the expansion." Ezra's relieved smile told her she had made the right choice. They fell into a comfortable partnership over the following weeks. Amelia designed and built a chicken coop that was both functional and sturdy, impressing Ezra with her skill and attention to detail. She helped him train the young horses, discovering that she had a natural touch with the animals. She cooked meals that were far better than his simple bachelor fare, experimenting with the limited ingredients available and creating dishes that filled the cabin with wonderful smells. And slowly, carefully, they became friends. They talked about everything and nothing during the long winter evenings. Ezra told her about growing up in New Mexico territory, about his parents who had died of cholera when he was 14, leaving him and Sarah to fend for themselves. Amelia told him about her mother, who had died giving birth to a stillborn baby when Amelia was 12, and how her father had never quite recovered from the loss. "We are both orphans," Ezra observed one night, "both of us adrift in the world with no family to anchor us. Maybe that is why this works, Amelia said softly. We understand each other's loneliness. The attraction between them continued to grow, an unspoken current that ran beneath all their interactions. Amelia caught Ezra watching her sometimes, his expression unguarded and full of longing. She knew he could see the same in her eyes when she looked at him. But neither of them acted on it, both wary of ruining the fragile peace they had built. Then came a cold morning in early February when everything changed. Amelia had gone out to the barn early to check on one of the mares who was close to foaling. She found the horse in distress, clearly in labor, but struggling. She ran back to the cabin for Ezra, and together they worked for hours to help bring the foal safely into the world. It was a difficult birth, and there were moments when Amelia thought they might lose both mare and foal. But Ezra's steady hands and calm voice guided them through, and finally a small colt was born, wet and gangly and perfect. They watched as the mother cleaned her baby, and when the colt struggled to stand for the first time, Amelia felt tears of joy streaming down her face. "We did it," she whispered, gripping Ezra's arm. "You did it," he corrected, turning to look at her. "You were the one who noticed something was wrong. If you had not been there, I might have lost them both." They were standing very close together, both of them exhausted and emotional from the intensity of the experience. Amelia looked up at Ezra and saw everything she felt reflected in his eyes: relief, joy, and something deeper and more powerful. "Amelia," he said softly, his voice rough with emotion, "I need to tell you something." "I know," she said, because she did know. She could see it in every line of his face, feel it in the way his hand came up to cup her cheek. "I am falling in love with you," he said. "I think I started falling the moment I saw you in that town square, looking so brave and fierce despite everything. And every day since then, I have fallen a little more." Amelia felt her heart soar. "I love you too," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I did not mean to, did not plan to, but I do. I love you, Ezra." He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, his lips warm against hers. Amelia wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, pouring all her feelings into the embrace. It was her first kiss, and it was perfect, everything she had ever dreamed a kiss could be. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Ezra rested his forehead against hers. "I do not want you to think I expect anything because you are staying here," he said seriously. "Your job is still your job, and your place here is secure whether you return my feelings or not." "I know that," Amelia said. "That is part of why I love you. You have never once made me feel like I owed you anything. You gave me freedom and then gave me a choice, and you have respected every decision I have made. I want to keep doing that," Ezra said. "I want to court you properly, if you will let me. I want to give you the time to be sure about your feelings, to be sure about me." "I am already sure," Amelia protested, but she saw the wisdom in his words. She had been through so much in such a short time, had her entire life upended in the space of a few weeks. Taking things slowly, making sure this was real and lasting, and not just a product of circumstance, made sense. "Humor me," Ezra said with a smile. "Let me do this right. Let me prove to you every day that I am worthy of your love." So they courted, although they were already living under the same roof and working side by side every day. Ezra picked wildflowers for her, when the spring thaw brought the first brave blooms pushing through the earth. He carved a beautiful jewelry box for her birthday, inlaying it with different woods in an intricate pattern. He read her poetry in the evenings and taught her to dance in the cabin, humming tunes while they spun around the small space. Amelia baked him his favorite foods and mended his clothes with careful stitches. She helped him train the new colt, who they had named Lucky. She surprised him with a new bookshelf she had built, creating storage space for his growing collection of books. They kissed often, but went no further, both wanting to wait until they were properly married. It was an old-fashioned courtship, sweet and chaste, but it felt right to Amelia. After everything she had been through, after being treated as property to be sold, there was something healing about being cherished and respected. In late April, Ezra asked her to marry him. They were sitting by the creek that ran through his property, watching the water flow swift and clear with snowmelt from the distant mountains. He had been quiet all afternoon, and Amelia had sensed he was working up the courage to say something. "Amelia," he began, then stopped and started again. "Amelia, I know we have not been together long by most standards. It has only been a few months since I found you in that town square. but I feel like I have known you my whole life. You are my best friend, my partner, and the love of my life." He pulled out a small box and opened it, revealing a simple gold band. "This was my mother's ring. It is not fancy, but it is real, and it is offered with all my heart. Will you marry me? Will you build a life with me here, raise horses and hopefully children, grow old together?" "Yes," Amelia said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, 1,000 times. Yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. They kissed in the spring sunshine, the sound of the creek flowing nearby and birds singing in the cottonwood trees, and Amelia thought she had never been happier. They were married in May, in the small church in Tascosa. The same people who had gathered to watch Amelia be sold now gathered to watch her marry the man who had saved her, and if some of them were scandalized by the speed of the courtship, most seemed genuinely happy for them. The preacher spoke about redemption and new beginnings, about how God could bring good even out of terrible circumstances. Amelia wore a simple dress she had sewn herself, white cotton with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Ezra wore his best suit, his dark hair neatly trimmed and his face cleanly shaved. When they said their vows, Amelia's voice rang out clear and strong, with no hesitation or doubt. "I, Amelia Everett, take you, Ezra Zimmerman, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, honor you, and stand beside you through whatever life brings. You gave me freedom when I had none, hope when I was in despair, and love when I had forgotten it existed. I will spend the rest of my life trying to give you the same." Ezra's own vows were equally heartfelt, his voice thick with emotion as he promised to cherish and protect her, to be worthy of the trust she had placed in him. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Ezra kissed her with a passion that made several of the older ladies in the congregation fan themselves, and Amelia laughed against his lips, giddy with joy. They held a small celebration at the ranch afterward, inviting a few neighbors who had become friends over the winter months. There was fiddle music and dancing, simple food and homemade wine, and laughter that echoed across the prairie. Amelia danced with her husband under the stars, feeling like she was floating, like this happiness could not possibly be real. "Are you happy?" Ezra asked as they swayed together, the party winding down around them. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Amelia said honestly. "When I stood in that town square, I thought my life was over. I thought I would spend the next 3 years in servitude and then be cast out with nothing. I never imagined this." "Neither did I," Ezra admitted. "I rode into town that morning, planning to buy supplies and leave. I had no intention of spending $50 on anything, let alone a stranger's indenture contract. But I saw you standing there, looking so brave and so scared at the same time, and I knew I could not just ride away. I am glad you did not." Amelia kissed him softly. "Thank you for giving me your horse. Thank you for giving me a choice. Thank you for giving me a home." "This is as much your ranch as mine now," Ezra said. "Everything I have, everything I am, it is all yours." They spent their wedding night in the cabin that had become their home, finally coming together as husband and wife. Ezra was gentle and patient, mindful of Amelia's inexperience, and she felt safe and cherished in his arms. It was not the wild passion of dime novels, but something deeper and more real, an expression of the love and trust they had built together. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed, the moonlight streaming through the window and painting everything in shades of silver. "I love you," Ezra murmured against her hair. "I will never stop loving you." "I love you too," Amelia replied. "Forever." Life on the ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. They worked hard through the spring and summer, expanding the horse breeding operation and taking on carpentry jobs in town to supplement their income. Amelia's skills became well known in the area, and she found herself commissioned to build everything from furniture to entire porches. Ezra continued to train horses, and his reputation as a skilled horseman spread through the territory. They were building something together, both literally and figuratively. The ranch grew and prospered, and so did their love. They learned each other's rhythms and moods, how to work together seamlessly, how to support each other through the inevitable challenges of frontier life. In the fall, Amelia realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, noticing the subtle changes in her body, but she waited until she was certain before telling Ezra. She chose to share the news one evening after dinner, when they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. "Ezra," she said, taking his hand in hers. "I have something to tell you." He turned to her, immediately alert to the seriousness in her tone. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "Nothing is wrong." She smiled at him, placing his hand on her still flat belly. "Everything is very, very right. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Ezra just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen, and he let out a whoop of joy that startled the horses in the nearby corral. "A baby?" he said, his voice full of wonder. "We are going to have a baby." "In the spring," Amelia confirmed. "Probably late April or early May." Ezra pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she might break. "I am going to be a father," he said, sounding dazed. "We are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Amelia asked, though she could see the answer written all over his face. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Ezra said. He pulled back to look at her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "You have given me so much, Amelia. A home, a purpose, love, and now a child. I do not know what I did to deserve you, but I will spend every day trying to be worthy of it." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Amelia continued working through the winter, though Ezra hovered anxiously and tried to keep her from doing anything too strenuous. She found his concern endearing even when it was excessive, and she let him fuss over her because she knew it made him feel useful. They spent the winter months preparing for the baby's arrival. Ezra built a beautiful cradle from oak, carving intricate designs into the headboard. Amelia sewed tiny clothes and blankets, marveling at how small everything was. They argued playfully about names, each proposing options and vetoing the other's suggestions. "What about James if it is a boy?" Ezra suggested one evening. "Too common," Amelia said. "Half the men in town are named James." "All right, what about Matthew?" "My father had a brother named Matthew who was a notorious drunk. I would rather not." They eventually settled on Samuel for a boy and Rose for a girl, names that felt right to both of them. As her due date approached, Amelia found herself thinking often about the journey that had brought her to this moment. Less than a year and a half ago, she had been standing on an auction block, frightened and alone, with no idea what her future would hold. Now she was married to a man she loved deeply, carrying his child, living in a home they had built together. The transformation was so complete, it sometimes felt like a dream. "Do you ever think about that day in the town square?" she asked Ezra one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting gently on her swollen belly. "All the time," he admitted. "I think about what might have happened if I had not ridden into town that morning, or if I had decided to just ignore what was happening. The idea of you ending up with someone like Crawford, or worse, it makes my blood run cold." "I think about it too," Amelia said. "But mostly I think about how you gave me your horse. That moment when you handed me Copper's reins and told me to go somewhere better, I think that was when I started falling in love with you. Not because you saved me, but because you gave me the choice. You gave me back my freedom and my dignity." "You deserved both," Ezra said simply. "Every person does." The baby came on a warm May evening, just as the sun was setting over the prairie. Amelia's labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Ezra feared he would lose her. He held her hand through every contraction, wiped her face with cool cloths, whispered encouragement and love into her ear. The midwife from town stayed calm and competent through it all, guiding Amelia through the process with experienced hands. And finally, after hours of labor, a baby's cry filled the cabin, strong and healthy and beautiful. "It is a boy," the midwife announced, wrapping the infant in a clean blanket and placing him in Amelia's arms. A fine, strong boy. Amelia looked down at her son, at his tiny, perfect face, and his shock of dark hair so like his father's, and she felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. "Hello, Samuel," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." Ezra knelt beside the bed, staring at his son with wonder written across his face. "He is perfect," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "You are perfect. Thank you, Amelia. Thank you for this gift." They spent that first night as parents in a state of exhausted awe, taking turns holding Samuel, marveling at every tiny detail. His little hands with their perfect miniature fingers, the way he yawned, the serious expression on his face, even in sleep. It all seemed miraculous. In the days that followed, they settled into the rhythms of parenthood. Amelia recovered quickly from the birth, and soon she was back to her usual activities, though now with a baby strapped to her back or sleeping in a basket nearby. Samuel proved to be a relatively easy baby, content to watch his parents work, crying only when he was hungry or tired. Ezra took to fatherhood with the same dedication he brought to everything else. He was patient and gentle with Samuel, singing to him in a soft voice, carrying him around the ranch to show him the horses and the land that would someday be his inheritance. Amelia loved watching them together, seeing the way Ezra's face softened when he looked at his son. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. They added more horses to their breeding program, and Amelia took on larger carpentry projects, including building an addition onto their cabin to create a separate bedroom for Samuel. The work was hard but satisfying, and they were building something that would last, something they could pass down to their children. Samuel grew into a bright, curious toddler, full of energy and mischief. He loved the horses as much as his parents did, and by the time he was 3, he was riding with Ezra on gentle trail rides around the ranch. They taught him to be kind to animals, to work hard, to value honesty and integrity above all else. When Samuel was 4, Amelia became pregnant again. This time, they welcomed a daughter into the world, a little girl with her mother's blonde hair and her father's amber eyes. They named her Rose, as they had planned all those years ago, and she completed their family in a way Amelia had not known was missing. Life was not without its challenges. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick animals and broken equipment, all the struggles inherent in frontier life. But through it all, Amelia and Ezra faced everything together, their love growing deeper and stronger with each passing year. They never forgot where they had come from, the hard times that had brought them together. Ezra still sent letters inquiring about his sister, though the responses always came back negative. Amelia still remembered the cold fear of standing on that auction block, the hopelessness she had felt. But those memories served a purpose, reminding them to be grateful for what they had built, to never take their happiness for granted. One evening, when Samuel was 7 and Rose was 3, a stranger rode up to the ranch. Ezra went out to meet him, and Amelia watched from the porch, curious about the visitor. The man was weathered and tired-looking, and he spoke with Ezra for a long time before handing him a letter and riding away. Ezra stood there for a moment, staring at the letter in his hands, and Amelia could see even from a distance that he was shaking. She hurried down to him, concern flooding through her. "Ezra, what is it? What is wrong?" He looked up at her, and she was shocked to see tears streaming down his face. "It is Sarah," he said, his voice breaking. After all these years, someone finally found her. Amelia took the letter and read it quickly. It was from a marshal in Colorado, reporting that a woman matching Sarah Zimmerman's description had been found living on a ranch near Denver. She had been bought by a rancher 9 years ago, but instead of abusing her, he had eventually freed her and married her. She had children now, a family, and when the marshal had asked about her past, she had mentioned a brother named Ezra, who she had lost contact with years ago. "She is alive," Ezra said wonderingly. "She is safe and married and happy. After all this time, after all the terrible things I imagined, she is all right." "Oh, Ezra!" Amelia wrapped her arms around him, holding him tight as he cried with relief and joy. "This is wonderful news. You have to go see her." "We will all go," Ezra said, pulling back to look at her. "I want her to meet you and the children. I want her to see that I did not give up, that I kept looking for her all these years." So, in the summer of 1889, they made the long journey to Colorado. It was an adventure for the children, who had never traveled farther than Tascosa, and they marveled at the changing landscape as they headed north. Amelia watched Ezra carefully during the trip, seeing the mixture of excitement and nervousness in his face as they drew closer to their destination. When they finally arrived at the ranch outside Denver, a woman came out of the house to greet them. She was in her mid-20s, with dark hair and amber eyes that were achingly familiar. She looked at Ezra for a long moment, and then her face crumpled. "Ezra," she said, her voice trembling, "is it really you?" "Sarah." Ezra dismounted and rushed to her, and they fell into each other's arms, both crying and laughing at the same time. Amelia felt her own eyes fill with tears as she watched the reunion, this healing of an old wound that had shaped so much of Ezra's life. They spent a week at Sarah's ranch, and the two siblings spent hours catching up, filling in all the missing years. Sarah's story was not an easy one, but it had ended well. The rancher who had bought her, a widower named Thomas with 2 young children, had treated her with kindness and respect. Over time, They had fallen in love, and he had freed her and married her. She had 3 children now, 2 from Thomas's first marriage and 1 of her own, and she was happy. "I never stopped hoping you would find me," Sarah told Ezra on their last evening together. "I used to dream that you would ride up one day, that somehow we would be together again. I am so glad you kept looking." "I could not give up," Ezra said. "You are my sister, my family, and I wanted you to know that I made something of myself, that our parents would be proud." "They would be," Sarah said, looking around at Amelia and the children. "You have a beautiful family, Ezra. I am so happy for you." Sarah and Amelia became fast friends during that week, bonding over their shared experiences and their love for Ezra. Before they left, they made plans to visit again the following summer, determined to keep the family together now that they had been reunited. The journey home felt lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted from all of them. Ezra smiled more easily, laughed more freely, and Amelia knew that finding his sister alive and well had healed something deep inside him. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. Samuel grew into a strong young man who shared his father's love of horses and his mother's skill with his hands. Rose proved to be bright and spirited, with a talent for drawing and painting that they encouraged. They added a 3rd child to their family, another son they named after Amelia's father, and their home was always filled with laughter and love. Ezra and Amelia grew older together, their faces gaining lines and their hair gaining gray, but their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger with time, deepened by shared experiences and mutual respect. They had built a life together from nothing, had created a legacy that would outlast them. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Ezra took Amelia back to the spot where he had proposed, the creek that ran through their property. It was a warm May evening, much like the night they had married, and the water flowed clear and bright in the fading light. "Do you remember this place?" Ezra asked, taking her hand in his. "Of course," Amelia said. "This is where you gave me your mother's ring, where you asked me to spend my life with you." "I wanted to bring you back here because I wanted to say thank you," Ezra said. "Thank you for saying yes that day. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for loving me through everything." "Ezra, I am the one who should be thanking you," Amelia protested. "You saved me, gave me everything I have." "No," Ezra said firmly. "You saved yourself. All I did was give you a horse and a choice. Everything else, everything we have built, that is because of your strength and your courage and your love. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." Amelia Zimmerman. Amelia felt tears prick her eyes. After 20 years of marriage, he could still make her feel like the most cherished woman in the world. "I love you," she said simply. Then, now, and always. They kissed as the sun set over the prairie, the same land where their story had begun all those years ago on a cold winter morning. And Amelia thought about how far they had come, how a moment of unexpected kindness had changed both their lives forever. The years continued to unfold in a pattern of seasons and celebrations. Samuel married a sweet girl from a neighboring ranch and built a house on the far corner of the property, starting his own family while still helping run the horse breeding operation. Rose surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, opening a small school in Tascosa, where she taught reading and arithmetic to the children of ranchers and cowboys. The youngest, William, followed in his mother's footsteps and became a skilled carpenter and builder, much sought after throughout the territory. Ezra and Amelia became grandparents, and they delighted in the parade of grandchildren who filled their home with noise and laughter. They taught the next generation to ride, to work hard, to treat others with kindness and respect, and they told the story of how they met, of the winter day when a cowboy bought a woman's freedom and gave her his horse, sparking a love story that would span decades. As they grew older, they spent more time sitting on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching the sunset and remembering. They remembered the hard times and the good times, the struggles and the triumphs, all the moments that had woven together to create their life. "Do you have any regrets?" Amelia asked Ezra one evening when they were both in their 60s, their hair white and their bodies showing the wear of a life of hard work. Ezra thought for a moment, then shook his head. "Not a single one. Every choice I made, every path I took, it led me to you. How could I regret any of it?" "I feel the same way," Amelia said, leaning against his shoulder. "Even the hard parts, even standing on that auction block, I would not change any of it if it meant not finding you. They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the sun painted the sky in brilliant colors. In the distance, they could see their grandchildren playing in the yard, hear the sounds of horses nickering in the barn, smell the smoke from the kitchen where their daughter-in-law was preparing dinner. "We built a good life," Ezra said quietly. "A life worth living. The best life," Amelia agreed. They remained on the ranch until they were both very old, only slowing down when their bodies insisted. Even then, they were active participants in the running of the operation, offering advice and wisdom gained from decades of experience. The ranch had grown into one of the most successful horse breeding operations in Texas, and their descendants continued to build on the foundation that Ezra and Amelia had laid. When Ezra finally passed away at the age of 78, peacefully in his sleep with Amelia beside him, the funeral brought people from all over the territory. Cowboys and ranchers, townspeople and neighbors, all came to pay their respects to a man who had been known for his integrity, his skill with horses, and his deep love for his family. Amelia mourned him deeply, but not with despair. They had been given more than 50 years together, had built a life full of love and meaning. She knew how lucky she had been, knew that not everyone got the kind of love story they had shared. She lived another 5 years after Ezra's death, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She spent her time working on small carpentry projects, teaching her granddaughters to sew, sitting on the porch and remembering. And when she finally passed away at the age of 81, peacefully in her sleep just as Ezra had, the family buried her beside him on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. The stone was simple, marking the graves of Ezra and Amelia Zimmerman, with a date of birth and death for each. But beneath those facts, someone had carved a brief inscription that told their story better than any lengthy epitaph could. He gave her freedom. She gave him love. Together, they built a legacy. And in the years that followed, when family members gathered on that hill to remember the couple who had started it all, they would tell the story of the winter day in Tascosa when a cowboy had walked into town and changed 2 lives forever. They would talk about how he had paid $50 for a woman's indenture contract and then immediately given her his horse, asking nothing in return. They would describe the love that had grown from that act of kindness, a love that had shaped generations. The ranch continued to thrive under the management of their descendants, and the Zimmerman name became synonymous with quality horses and honest dealing. But more than that, it became synonymous with love, with the idea that kindness and respect could transform lives, that sometimes the most valuable thing you could give another person was their freedom and their dignity. And on cold winter mornings, when the snow covered the prairie and the wind howled across the land, some said you could still see 2 figures walking together toward the barn, a tall man and a blonde woman, their hands linked and their love as eternal as the land they had claimed as their own. Their story had ended, but their legacy lived on, a testament to the power of compassion, the strength of love, and the courage to give someone a choice. It was a story of the West, of hard work and harder times, of loss and redemption, and the building of something lasting. But most of all, it was a story of 2 souls who had found each other in the unlikeliest of circumstances and had created something beautiful together. And that was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth passing down through the generations, as a reminder that even in the darkest moments, kindness could spark hope, and hope could kindle love, and love could build a world